As Australia's population increases, so does the need for urbanisation. The majority of Australia's population growth is concentrated along the coastlines, in cities and outskirt urban areas. Although many see urbanisation as having negative impacts on biodiversity, it can also provide an attractive habitat with an abundance of food and shelter for animals such as birds. HIREC, or human-induced rapid evolutionary change, is the process of a species obtaining certain attributes or mutations that are quickly spread to allow the species to survive in new extreme environments. Extreme changes in habitats, such as food availability or nest sites, forces species to either adapt to the new conditions and quickly or disappear. We decided to test the differences between bird population flight responses when approached by a human in 3 different locations, with differing levels of urbanisation. These locations are the Inner West Sydney, Springwood in the Blue Mountains, and Bathurst.
Flight response is an active defence response that is initiated by a bird when there is a potential predator or danger. The flight response distance shows the animal's trade-off between the benefit of continuing their feeding activity and the cost of retreating. This is a standard measure of the risk the individual is willing to take. By comparing birds from highly urbanised areas with those in rural areas, we aim to see if there are any indication of evolutionary or behavioural change, such as HIREC, Human-Induced Rapid Evolutionary Change. Similar studies have been conducted in the past and have found that urban populations of birds generally have shorter flight initiation distances compared to rural populations. However, it remains to be determined whether this is due to phenotypic plasticity or evolutionary change. In our experiment, we addressed 3 out of the 4 Tinbergen's questions. These include immediate causation, function, and evolution. Our aims of this experiment were to determine the flight initiation distances of bird populations in 3 different locations and compare the flight initiation distances of bird populations in those 3 different locations.
We hypothesise that the location with the least amount of urbanisation, Bathurst, will contain birds with the longest flight initiation distance, and the location with the most urbanisation, Inner West Sydney, will have birds with the shortest flight initiation distance. In this experiment, we aimed to analyse the flight initiation response of urban and rural bird populations in 3 different locations. These included an urban area in Sydney's Inner West, a semi-urban area in the Blue Mountains, and a rural area in Bathurst. At each location, the following equipment was used: 2 recording cameras, a tripod, a measuring tape, a bird species identifier book, distance markers, for example sticks or sports cones, and native bird seed.
A distance of 20 metres was measured out using a measuring tape with markers placed at 5-metre intervals. A small amount of native birdseed was placed at the end of this measurement before a waiting time of 2 or 20 minutes was given for birds to be attracted to the food. Human subjects were then filmed approaching the birds, with the first flight initiation response recorded for each replicate.
Here we compared the average flight initiation distances of each location. From the graph, we can see that Bathurst clearly had the largest flight initiation distance, with an average of 13.6 metres, in comparison to the Blue Mountains in the Inner West, which had averages of 2.33 metres and 0.35 metres respectively. The standard error bars shown in each column indicate the variation in results, showing that Bathurst had the highest variation in flight initiation results compared to the Blue Mountains and the Inner West. A one-way ANOVA was used to determine if the variation of results were statistically significant, and as we can see from the table below, they are significant, with a p-value of 0.00 at a 95% confidence interval. The results from Bathurst show that when the birds were approached by a person, most of them flew away between the first 1 and 10 metres of approaching them, having a long flight initiation distance. The birds that were observed in this location include the Australian magpie, galah, and crested pigeon. During the experiment, a lot of the birds present were very timid and reacted early to the presence of humans.
Birds that were assessed in the Blue Mountains appeared to be comfortable with close human proximity. We observed that on average most of the birds did not take flight until human subjects were within 2 meters of the area they were feeding. All bird species in this experiment were pigeons except for a single noisy miner. We observed that the birds became more used to the human subjects over the course of the experiment, and that walking speed also appeared to have a significant impact on flight initiation distance.
The Inner West Sydney results display a narrow range of flight initiation response values, from 1 metre to 0.1 metres. This demonstrates that birds in the urban environment were significantly less responsive to the stress of an approaching person when compared to rural samples, with all flight initiation distances less than 1 metre.
In the context of Tinbergen's questions, our study provides insight into the immediate causation and function of this specific behavioural trait. We indicate that the mechanism of flight initiation distance is elicited by the stimulus of human proximity, with the function of this adaptation being to promote the survival of birds by providing a weighted decision between fleeing from potential danger, thus losing a meal, or remaining vulnerable to potential predators in order to obtain nutrition. Our study was limited by some notable factors. The study was spatially and temporally confounded in that all replicates for each 3 sites were performed at the same location within these sites, and the collection of data was performed on different days at different times between sites. As well as this, the Inner West site faced unique limitations due to the high density of people in the area, such as people walking through the filming location and deliberately shooing birds. In future studies, research should be conducted that both eliminates the confounding variables present in this experiment, as well as aim to reduce gaps in scientific knowledge not addressed by this study, such as the variation in the behaviour of flight initiation exhibited by different species of birds, and investigate how this behaviour arose through the process of natural selection.
In conclusion, we found significant evidence that birds had shorter flight initiation distances in concert with higher levels of urbanisation. This supported our hypothesis that urbanised birds would allow greater levels of human proximity before a flight response, compared with birds in less densely populated areas. These findings indicate that greater degrees of urbanisation operate at high competitive levels, as birds were willing to take greater risks for potential benefits.